You give everything. You show up. You pay attention to every detail, what they said, what they didn't say, the tone in a text message, the pause before an answer. And somehow, despite all of that, you still end up lying awake at night, wondering if they're really okay with you, if you're really enough, if they actually want you there or just tolerate your presence. And the worst part? You already know this pattern. You've seen it before. You've promised yourself you wouldn't do it again. And here you are, loving someone deeply and still feeling completely invisible. There's a name for what's happening inside you, and understanding it might be the most important thing you do this year. In psychology, anxious attachment is one of 4 attachment styles identified by researchers John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and it is by far the most emotionally exhausting one to live with from the inside. People with anxious attachment don't love less than others. In many ways, they love more. They are deeply attuned, emotionally sensitive, and genuinely invested in the people they care about. But beneath all of that, love runs a current of persistent uncertainty, a quiet but relentless fear that the connection they have built could disappear at any moment, that they are always one wrong move away from being abandoned. This fear does not come from nowhere. Anxious attachment almost always develops in early relationships, typically in childhood, where love and availability were inconsistent. Not necessarily absent, inconsistent. The caregiver was sometimes warm, attentive, and present, and sometimes withdrawn, distracted, or unpredictable. The child could never quite determine what caused the shift. So the child did what any intelligent, sensitive mind would do in that situation. It stayed on high alert. It learned to monitor mood, read subtle signals, and do whatever was necessary to keep the connection stable. Because when connection felt uncertain, the anxiety of waiting for it to break became unbearable. What that child learned has now followed you into your adult relationships. The high alert never turned off, the monitoring never stopped, and the people you love most, the ones who matter the most to you, become, almost paradoxically, the ones who trigger the most anxiety. Because the more someone matters, the more their distance feels like a threat. A short reply becomes evidence of anger. A canceled plan becomes proof of rejection. A quiet mood becomes a question you spend hours trying to answer. None of this is irrational. It is a nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do. The problem is that it is responding to a threat that, in most cases, is no longer actually there. Here's what makes anxious attachment so difficult to talk about, especially in Christian communities. Many people with anxious attachment are told that their struggle is simply a lack of faith, that if they truly trusted God, they would not feel so afraid of losing people, that their need for reassurance is a sign of spiritual immaturity. But this interpretation misunderstands both psychology and theology. Anxious attachment is not a faith problem. It is a formation problem. It was formed in your nervous system long before you had the cognitive capacity to choose how to respond to uncertainty. And the presence of anxiety in your relationships does not mean God is absent. It may mean that the places where healing needs to happen are deeper than behavior. They are structural. They live in the body, in the nervous system, in the relational templates that were built before you had words for any of it. The Apostle John writes in 1 John 4:18 that perfect love drives out fear. This verse is often quoted as a command, as if fearfulness in relationships is simply a choice that faith should eliminate. But read in context, John is describing the character of God's love, a love so complete, so unconditional, so impossible to lose that fear has nothing left to grab onto. This is not primarily a verse about willpower, it is a verse about the nature of secure love. And for someone whose nervous system has never fully experienced secure love, love that is consistent, that does not fluctuate, that does not require performance to maintain, this kind of love is not just spiritually true, it is physiologically healing. So what does anxious attachment actually look like in daily life? Because from the outside, it often looks like love, and in many ways it is. But it is love that is running on fear rather than freedom. It looks like sending a follow-up message when someone doesn't respond quickly enough, not because you need information, but because silence feels dangerous. It looks like replaying conversations afterward, searching for the moment things shifted. It looks like shrinking yourself in certain relationships, becoming quieter, less opinionated, more agreeable because you have learned, somewhere along the way, that taking up space risks the connection. It looks like feeling unreasonably hurt when someone needs space, not because you are selfish, but because your nervous system reads distance as rejection. And it looks like an almost constant low-grade emotional exhaustion, because being in love with anxious attachment means your body is always partially braced for loss, even when nothing is actually wrong. One of the most painful experiences for people with anxious attachment is the gap between what they feel and what they can say. They feel enormous amounts. They are often among the most emotionally perceptive people in any room. But expressing that emotional reality without sounding needy, demanding, or unstable feels nearly impossible. So they compress it, they manage it, they perform calm while internally navigating a storm. And over time, the effort of managing their own emotional intensity in relationships becomes its own kind of exhaustion, separate from the relationships themselves. Healing anxious attachment is not a matter of deciding to trust more. It is a neurological and relational process. It happens through experiences of consistent, reliable connection, where your need for reassurance is met without punishment, where your emotional reality is acknowledged without being used against you, and where distance does not mean abandonment. This is slow work. It is not resolved in a conversation or a prayer or a single moment of insight, as powerful as those things can be. It happens across time, in relationships where the pattern gets interrupted enough times that the nervous system gradually revises its prediction about what love means. For the person of faith, this healing carries a dimension that secular psychology alone cannot fully address. Because the most consistent, most reliable, most unconditionally available relationship that exists is not a human one. And this is not a platitude. It is a neurological reality. When the practice of prayer, stillness, and scripture becomes a genuine experience of being known and not abandoned, not a performance of faith, but an actual encounter with presence, the nervous system begins to register something it may have never fully experienced before. That it is safe to be here. That closeness is not a threat. That love does not require constant maintenance to survive. This does not mean human relationships stop mattering. It means the source of your security shifts. And when security is no longer entirely dependent on whether the people around you are in a good mood, or texting back quickly, or showing up in the ways you need, something begins to loosen. The grip relaxes. The monitoring softens. Not overnight, not perfectly, but genuinely. And in that shift, you become capable of something that anxious attachment makes nearly impossible. Loving people freely. without the constant undercurrent of fear, without the exhausting work of managing their perception of you, without needing their consistent reassurance to know that you are okay. You were not built for that kind of love. You were built for something steadier, and the path toward it begins not with trusting people more, but with understanding, honestly and without shame, what your nervous system has been carrying all along. If this reached something in you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week I create content at the intersection of psychology and Christian faith, because your inner life matters and you deserve the language to understand it. You are not alone in this.